The snow was falling heavily that December evening, transforming Chicago into something almost unrecognizable, the kind of snow that softened the city's hard edges, muffled its endless noise, and draped everything in a blanket of pure, pristine white. Streetlights cast golden halos through the swirling flakes, and the towering buildings along Michigan Avenue looked like sentinels standing guard over a sleeping kingdom. It was the sort of night that made even the most hardened souls pause and remember that beauty still existed in the world. Dominic Salvatore stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, watching the snow fall over his city. He'd earned that right to call it his, paid for it in blood, in bodies, in pieces of his soul he'd never get back. At 37 years old, he was the most powerful man in Chicago's underworld, the head of an empire his father had built, and he had expanded beyond anything the old man could have imagined. Behind him, the conference table still held the remnants of a 3-hour meeting with his underbosses. Cigar smoke lingered in the air. Deals had been made. Threats had been issued. Another day in the life of Dominic Salvatore. He caught his reflection in the glass. Dark hair pushed back from a face that rarely smiled. Steel-gray eyes that had seen too much death to ever look innocent again. And a faint scar running along his left cheek. A reminder of lessons learned the hard way. His black cashmere overcoat hung perfectly on his broad shoulders, and the Patek Philippe on his wrist caught the light as he raised his glass of whiskey. "I'm going for a walk," he announced, without turning around. Marco Benedetti, his most trusted man, immediately tensed. "Boss, that's not a good idea. The Kozlov situation is still—" "I didn't ask for your opinion, Marco." "Dominic." Marco rarely used his first name. "You're a target. Every Russian soldier in the city would love to put a bullet in your head." Dominic finally turned, and something in his expression made Marco fall silent. There was a weariness there that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion, the kind of tiredness that settled into a man's bones after years of violence, of watching over his shoulder, of trusting no one. "1 hour," Dominic said quietly. "I need to think. Alone." Marco's jaw tightened, but he knew better than to argue further. "At least take I have my weapon." Dominic patted the concealed holster beneath his coat. "That's all I need." He took the private elevator down and stepped out into the December night. The cold hit him immediately, sharp and clean, and he welcomed it. For a moment, he just stood there, letting the snowflakes land on his shoulders, his hair, his face. When was the last time he'd simply stopped? When was the last time he'd been alone with nothing but his thoughts and the silence? He began to walk, his expensive Italian shoes leaving prints in the fresh snow. The streets were quieter than usual, most people driven indoors by the weather. Dominic passed storefronts decorated for Christmas, their windows glowing with warmth and promise. A promise that had never included him. 37 years old, wealthy beyond measure, powerful beyond question, and completely, utterly alone. He had everything a man could want except someone to share it with. His father had died 3 years ago, his mother, long before that, and Isabella. He pushed that thought away. He always pushed that thought away. The snow fell harder now, and Dominic found himself on a quieter street, away from the main thoroughfares. He wasn't sure how long he'd been walking, long enough for the cold to seep through his coat, for his fingers to grow numb despite his leather gloves. He was about to turn back when movement caught his eye. That's when he saw her, a little girl, no more than 6, standing alone under the dim streetlight, snowflakes settling in her blonde hair like scattered stars. Dominic stopped walking, his instincts immediately on alert. A child alone on the streets of Chicago at night. In the middle of a snowstorm, something was very wrong. He scanned the surrounding area, checking for threats, for anyone who might be watching. The street was empty. Just him and this tiny figure standing in a pool of pale yellow light. He approached slowly, carefully, the way one might approach a frightened animal. He didn't want to scare her. As he drew closer, the details came into focus, and each one made his chest tighten a little more. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a small ponytail, though strands had escaped and now hung limp and wet around her face. She wore a pink winter coat, the kind that looked adorable in a store window but offered little real protection against a Chicago winter. It was too thin, too small, clearly bought by someone stretching every dollar. Her small boots were worn at the toes, practical but old, and clutched against her chest, held with desperate tightness, was a tattered teddy bear that had clearly been loved for years. But it was her face that stopped Dominic in his tracks. Her cheeks were red from the cold, her nose running, and her blue eyes. God, those eyes were filled with a terror that no child should ever know. She'd been crying. The tear tracks on her cheeks had frozen in the bitter wind. Dominic crouched down slowly, bringing himself to her eye level. He kept his hands visible, non-threatening, though he felt ridiculous. When was the last time Dominic Salvatore had worried about appearing non-threatening to anyone? "Hello there," he said, his voice gentler than it had been in years. "What's your name, little one? Where are your parents?" The girl took a small step back, her arms tightening around her teddy bear. She studied him with those enormous blue eyes, and Dominic had the strange sensation of being evaluated, judged, by a 6-year-old. Then she said something that pierced through every wall he'd built around his heart. "You have sad eyes." Her voice was small, trembling from cold and fear. "My sister says people with sad eyes are usually kind inside." Dominic felt something shift in his chest, something he'd thought was long dead. "Your sister sounds very wise," he managed. "What's your name?" "I'm Sophie," she sniffled, wiping her nose with her mitten. "Sophie Winters." "Hello, Sophie. I'm Dominic. Can you tell me where your parents are? It's very cold out here for you to be alone." Sophie's lower lip trembled, and fresh tears spilled down her frozen cheeks. "My parents are in heaven. They went there when I was little. I live with my sister Elena now, but..." She couldn't finish. A sob escaped her small body, and she hugged her teddy bear so tight Dominic thought she might crush it. "But what, Sophie?" He kept his voice soft, patient, though his mind was already racing through possibilities. "Where is your sister?" Sophie looked up at him, and the words that came out of her mouth hit Dominic like a physical blow. "Sir, my sister didn't come home last night. She always comes home. Always. Even when she has to work late at the hospital, she always comes home to me. But she didn't come home. And Mrs. Chen said she probably just got busy. But Elena would never forget about me. Never." The conviction in that small voice, the absolute faith that her sister would never abandon her, it reminded Dominic of another little girl, another voice, another time. Isabella, 8 years old, looking up at him with those same trusting eyes. "You'll always protect me, right, Dom?" He'd failed her. He'd failed to protect the one person who mattered most. But this girl, this Sophie, was standing right in front of him, alive, scared, alone. Dominic Salvatore had built his empire on one simple rule: never get involved in matters that didn't concern business. Sentiment was weakness. Emotion was liability. He'd learned those lessons in blood, but looking at Sophie Winters, shivering in her too thin coat, clutching her teddy bear like a lifeline, he found that none of those rules seemed to matter anymore. In that moment, looking into those frightened blue eyes, Dominic Salvatore, the most feared man in Chicago's underworld, made a decision that would change everything. Dominic pulled out his phone, his fingers moving with urgency he rarely showed. Marco answered on the first ring. "Boss, everything okay? I need information." Now, Dominic glanced down at Sophie, who was watching him with wide, hopeful eyes. Elena Winters, 27 years old, nurse at Chicago General Hospital. Find out everything. Where she is, what happened to her, why she didn't come home last night. There was a pause. Marco had worked for Dominic for 15 years. He knew better than to question orders. But this was unusual. "Elena Winters," Marco repeated. "I'm on it. Give me 20 minutes. Dominic ended the call and looked back at Sophie. She was shivering violently now, her small body no match for the December cold. Without thinking, he shrugged off his cashmere overcoat and wrapped it around her. It swallowed her completely, dragging on the snowy ground, but at least she'd be warm. "Come on," he said, offering his hand. "Let's get you somewhere warm while we wait." Sophie hesitated for just a moment, then slipped her small, cold hand into his. The gesture of trust hit Dominic harder than he expected. There was a coffee shop half a block away, its windows glowing with warm light. Dominic led Sophie inside, and the heat wrapped around them like an embrace. A few patrons glanced up, a tall, intimidating man in a suit holding hands with a tiny blonde girl in an oversized coat, but quickly looked away. Something in Dominic's expression discouraged curiosity. He ordered hot chocolate for Sophie and black coffee for himself, then guided her to a quiet corner booth. Sophie wrapped both hands around her mug, letting the warmth seep into her frozen fingers. "Thank you, Mr. Dominic," she whispered. "Just Dominic is fine." Sophie took a careful sip, leaving a small mustache of whipped cream on her upper lip. Despite everything, Dominic felt the corner of his mouth twitch. "Tell me about your sister," he said gently. "Tell me about Elena." Sophie's face lit up, the way children's faces do when they talk about the people they love most. "Elena is the best sister in the whole world. She's 27, and she's a nurse. She helps sick people get better." Sophie paused, her expression growing more serious. She wanted to be a doctor. She had a scholarship and everything. But then Mommy and Daddy went to heaven, and she had to take care of me instead. Dominic felt that familiar tightening in his chest. When did your parents pass away? 5 years ago. I was only 1, so I don't really remember them. But Elena tells me stories about them all the time. She says Daddy was brave and Mommy was kind, and that's why I have to be both. 5 years. This woman, this Elena, had been raising her baby sister alone since she was 22 years old, had given up her dreams, her future, everything, to care for a child who wasn't even her own. Where do you live, Sophie? Lincoln Park. We have a small apartment, but Elena made it really pretty. She painted my room purple because it's my favorite color. And what about last night? What happened? Sophie's face crumbled. Elena was supposed to come home after work. She always gets home by 7, and she makes me dinner, and we watch cartoons together. But she didn't come. Mrs. Chen from next door came to check on me, and she said Elena probably just had to work late. But Elena always calls when she works late. Always. Dominic's phone buzzed. Marco. Excuse me for 1 moment, Sophie. He stepped a few feet away, keeping his eyes on the little girl. What did you find? Marco's voice was tight on the other end. Boss, I found something. It's not good. Dominic turned away from Sophie, lowering his voice. Tell me. Elena Winters was in a car accident 2 nights ago, Marco reported. She was driving home from her shift when another vehicle struck her from behind. Her car flipped twice before hitting a guardrail on the expressway. Dominic closed his eyes. Is she alive? Barely. She's been in a coma at St. Mary's Hospital. It's a small place out in the suburbs. The paramedics took her to the nearest facility. Marco paused. Here's the thing, boss. No one knew she had a sister. Her wallet was destroyed in the crash, and all her identification was lost. The hospital has been trying to locate next of kin for 2 days. And the neighbor? Mrs. Chen? Elena never made it home to tell anyone. Mrs. Chen assumed she was working a double shift. By the time she realized something was wrong, she had no idea where to look. Dominic glanced back at Sophie, who was watching him with anxious eyes over the rim of her hot chocolate. This little girl had spent 2 days not knowing if her sister was alive or dead. 2 days of terror and uncertainty and desperate hope. There's more, Marco continued, his voice dropping. I pulled the accident report. Something doesn't add up. What do you mean? The vehicle that hit her came from behind at high speed. No braking, no attempt to avoid collision. And here's the interesting part, there were no traffic cameras covering that stretch of road. None. In the middle of Chicago, Dominic's jaw tightened. The other driver? Fled the scene. No witnesses. No plates. Marco exhaled. Boss, this wasn't a drunk driver running a red light. This was deliberate. Someone targeted her. Find out who, and find out why. Dominic ended the call and walked back to the booth. Sophie looked up at him, her small face pale with fear. Did you find Elena? Is she okay? He sat down across from her, and for a moment, the most powerful man in Chicago had no idea what to say. How did you tell a 6-year-old that her sister, her only family in the world, was lying in a hospital bed, fighting for her life? Sophie, he began slowly. I found your sister. She's at a hospital. Sophie's eyes widened. Is she sick? Is that why she didn't come home? She was in a car accident. Sweetheart, she's hurt, but she's alive. The doctors are taking care of her. For a moment, Sophie just stared at him. Then her face crumpled, and a sob tore from her chest, the kind of raw, helpless cry that only a child can make. I want Elena! I want my sister! Dominic sat frozen. He had faced down rival crime bosses. He had stared into the barrels of guns without flinching. But this a crying child left him completely paralyzed. Then instinct took over. He slid into the booth beside Sophie and pulled her into his arms. She buried her face against his chest, her small body shaking with sobs, and Dominic held her. He couldn't remember the last time he had held anyone. Years, probably. Not since Isabella. It's okay, he murmured, the words feeling strange on his tongue. It's going to be okay. I'm going to take you to her right now. Sophie looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. Promise? I promise. He pulled out his phone again, dialing another number. Dr. Anthony Ricci answered on the second ring. Dominic? It's late. What's wrong? I need you at St. Mary's Hospital. There's a patient there, Elena Winters. I need you to assess her condition personally. And Tony? I'm bringing her sister. She's 6 years old. There was a pause. Dr. Ricci had known Dominic for 20 years. He'd never heard this tone in his voice before. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Dominic lifted Sophie into his arms and carried her out into the snow. His mind was already working, analyzing, calculating. A hit and run with no witnesses, no cameras, a driver who fled without a trace. Dominic's instincts, honed by years in the underworld, screamed that this was no accident. Someone had targeted Elena Winters. The question was, why? The black SUV cut through the snow-covered streets, Marco at the wheel, driving faster than was safe in these conditions. Dominic sat in the back with Sophie, who had fallen into an exhausted silence, her head resting against his arm, her teddy bear clutched to her chest. Street. Mary's hospital was a modest facility on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place that served the community without fanfare or prestige. Dominic had never set foot in a hospital like this. His world was private doctors, exclusive clinics, the best money could buy. They arrived to find Dr. Ricci already waiting in the lobby, his medical bag in hand. The older man raised an eyebrow when he saw Dominic carrying a sleeping child, but said nothing. Room 214, Dr. Ricci informed him. I've already spoken with the attending physician. They're expecting us. The walk down the sterile hallway felt endless. Sophie had woken up and was walking now, her small hand gripping Dominic's fingers so tightly it almost hurt. With each step, her breathing grew more rapid, more frightened. Then they reached the room, and Sophie stopped. Elena Winters lay motionless on the hospital bed, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed with mechanical indifference. Her face was pale, almost gray against the white pillow, and dark bruises painted her cheekbones and jaw. Her left arm was wrapped in bandages, an IV line snaking into her right hand. A breathing tube ran beneath her nose, but even in this state, even broken and battered and unconscious, there was something about her that made Dominic pause. Her hair was dark brown, almost black, spread across the pillow like silk. Her features were delicate but strong high cheekbones, a gentle curve to her lips that seemed to hold the ghost of a smile even now. Her hands, resting on the white sheets, bore the calluses of someone who worked hard, who spent her days caring for others. She was beautiful, not in the polished, artificial way of the women who usually surrounded him, but in a way that was real and warm and somehow heartbreaking. Elena. Sophie broke free from Dominic's grasp and ran to the bed. She climbed up carefully, somehow knowing not to jostle her sister, and took Elena's hand in both of hers. Elena, wake up. Please wake up. I'm here. I'm right here. Sophie's voice cracked. I was so scared, but Mr. Dominic found me, and he brought me to you. Please open your eyes. Elena didn't respond. The machines continued their steady rhythm. Dr. Ricci moved to the bedside, reviewing the chart, checking the monitors. After several minutes of examination, he pulled Dominic aside. Mild traumatic brain injury, 2 fractured ribs, minor internal bleeding that's been stabilized. She's in a coma, but her brain activity is normal. I'd expect her to wake within 24 to 48 hours. Will she recover fully? With proper care and monitoring, yes. But she needs better facilities than this. More attentive care. Dominic made his decision without hesitation. I'm taking her to my estate. You'll care for her there. Marco, who had been standing by the door, stepped forward. Boss, this is dangerous. We don't know who she is, who's after her. She's a nurse who raised her little sister alone. Dominic's voice was steel. That's all I need to know. Dominic, make the arrangements. Marco, private ambulance, full security escort. I want her moved within the hour. Marco stared at him for a long moment, something unreadable in his eyes. Then he nodded. Yes, boss. As Marco stepped out to make calls, Dominic returned to the bedside. Sophie was still holding her sister's hand, still whispering to her, refusing to give up hope. Sophie looked up at him with those trusting blue eyes. You're going to save my sister, aren't you, Mr. Dominic? He didn't answer. He wasn't sure he knew how to save anyone anymore. But God help him, he was going to try. The Salvatore estate rose from the snow-covered landscape like a fortress from another era. 10 acres of manicured grounds surrounded an Italian Renaissance mansion that had been built by Dominic's grandfather and expanded by his father. Stone walls, wrought iron gates, and armed guards at every entrance. This was not merely a home. It was a kingdom. The private ambulance passed through 3 security checkpoints before reaching the main house. Dominic had called ahead, and the staff had prepared the finest guest suite on the 2nd floor. By the time Elena was carried inside on a stretcher, the room had been transformed into a private medical ward, hospital bed, monitors, IV stands, everything Dr. Ricci could possibly need. Elena was transferred to the bed with careful precision. She looked small and fragile against the silk pillows, her dark hair stark against the cream-colored sheets. The bruises on her face seemed even more vivid in the soft lamplight. Sophie refused to leave her sister's side. She had barely spoken during the transfer, her eyes fixed on Elena's unconscious face, as if willing her to wake up. Now she sat in an antique armchair that had been pulled close to the bed, her legs too short to reach the floor, her teddy bear in her lap. "I'll stay with her," Sophie announced, her voice small but determined. "Elena doesn't like to be alone." Dominic didn't argue. He simply nodded to one of the maids, who brought blankets and a pillow for the little girl. He stood in the doorway for a long time, watching the two sisters. Sophie had taken Elena's hand again, her tiny fingers wrapped around her sister's palm, and was humming something soft, a lullaby, perhaps. The image struck something deep in Dominic's chest, something he had buried long ago. 15 years. It had been 15 years since he had stood in a doorway just like this, watching another girl lie in a bed, fighting for her life. Isabella had been 8 years old when the leukemia took her. 8 years old, with the same blonde hair and blue eyes as Sophie, the same stubborn determination, the same absolute faith that her big brother would fix everything. But Dominic couldn't fix it. Not with all his father's money, not with the best doctors in the country, not with prayers he didn't believe in. He had held Isabella's hand as she slipped away, and something inside him had died with her. His father had found him afterward, sitting alone in the dark, unable to cry, unable to feel anything at all. "Power means nothing if you can't protect what matters," the old man had said. "Remember that, Dominic. Build your empire, but never forget what truly matters." He had built the empire. He had just forgotten the rest. Until tonight, Dominic turned away from the doorway and walked to his study, where Marco was waiting with reports and updates. But even as he sat behind his desk, even as he reviewed security protocols and issued orders for round-the-clock protection, his mind kept drifting back to that room, to Elena's pale face, to Sophie's unwavering devotion. 24-hour guard rotation, Dominic said. 2 men outside the room at all times, 2 more at each entrance to the estate. No one gets in or out without my approval. Marco nodded, making notes. Then he paused, studying his boss with an expression Dominic couldn't quite read. "What?" Dominic asked. "Nothing. It's just—" Marco hesitated. "I've never seen you like this, boss." "Like what?" Marco met his eyes. "Human." The word hung in the air between them. Dominic said nothing. There was nothing to say. After Marco left, Dominic sat alone in the darkness of his study, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. Through the window, he could see the snow still falling, blanketing the world in white. For the first time in 15 years, Dominic Salvatore felt something other than anger, vengeance, or cold calculation. He felt hope, and that terrified him more than any enemy ever could. 36 hours passed like a held breath. Dominic found himself checking on the guest suite more often than he cared to admit, standing in the doorway at odd hours, watching the steady rise and fall of Elena's chest, making sure Sophie had eaten, had slept, had everything she needed. Dr. Ricci came and went, monitoring Elena's vitals, adjusting medications, assuring everyone that she was healing well. And then, on the second evening, Elena Winters opened her eyes. It happened without warning. One moment she was still, peaceful, lost in whatever dreamless sleep the coma had held her in. The next, her eyes flew open, brown eyes, deep and rich like autumn leaves, and she sat up with a gasp. Panic, pure, primal panic flooded her features as she took in her surroundings. The ornate ceiling, the silk sheets, the medical equipment, the unfamiliar room. "Sophie?" Her voice was hoarse, cracked from disuse. "Sophie!" Sophie, who had been dozing in the armchair, jolted awake instantly. When she saw her sister sitting up, eyes open, alive and conscious, a sob burst from her chest. "Elena!" She launched herself onto the bed, throwing her small arms around her sister's neck. Elena caught her, wincing at the pain in her ribs, but holding on tight, so tight, as if she would never let go. "Oh my God, Sophie. Sophie, baby. Are you okay? Are you hurt? What happened? Where are we?" "I'm okay. I'm okay." Sophie was crying and laughing at the same time. "I was so scared. Elena, you didn't come home and I didn't know where you were and I was all alone, but then Mr. Dominic found me and he brought me to you and wait." Elena pulled back slightly, her nurse's instincts overriding her emotions. She scanned Sophie quickly, checking for injuries, for signs of trauma. "Who is Mr. Dominic?" "Sophie, who brought you here? Where are we?" The door opened. Dominic stepped inside, drawn by the commotion. He'd been in his study when one of the guards radioed that the woman was awake. He'd moved faster than dignity allowed. Now he stood in the doorway, and Elena Winters looked at him for the first time. Her reaction was instantaneous. Despite her weakness, despite the pain that must have been screaming through her battered body, she pulled Sophie behind her back in one fluid motion. Her eyes, God, Those eyes locked onto him with a ferocity that would have made lesser men step back. "Who are you?" Her voice was stronger now, sharpened by fear and protective fury. "Where am I? What do you want with us?" Dominic raised his hands slowly, palms out, a gesture of peace. Strange. How foreign it felt. "My name is Dominic. Dominic Salvatore. You're safe here, this is my home. I found your sister alone in the snow 2 nights ago. She was looking for you." "He saved me, Elena." Sophie peeked out from behind her sister. "He helped me find you at the hospital. He's like a superhero." Elena's eyes never left Dominic's face. "Superheroes don't exist, Sophie." Dominic felt the corner of his mouth twitch. "Smart woman." Something shifted in Elena's expression. Her gaze moved past him, taking in details the antique furniture that cost more than she made in a year, the armed guard visible in the hallway, the way the staff had bowed their heads when addressing this man. "This isn't a normal house," she said slowly. "And you're not a normal businessman, are you?" "I am a businessman," Dominic replied carefully. "Just not a conventional one." Elena absorbed this. He could see her mind working, connecting dots, reaching conclusions. She was smart, he'd expected that from what Sophie had told him. But there was something else in her eyes now. Not the fear he was accustomed to seeing. Not the judgment he probably deserved. "You found my sister," she said quietly. "You brought her to me. You brought us both here." "Yes." "Why?" It was such a simple question, and yet Dominic had no simple answer. "Because she needed help," he finally said. "And I was there." Elena stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she relaxed her protective grip on Sophie just slightly, just enough to show that she wasn't going to run. Not yet. Elena's eyes met his, and Dominic saw something he hadn't expected. Not fear, not judgment, but a fierce, protective fire. This woman had stared down worse demons than him. She just didn't know it yet. Elena tried to leave the next morning. She made it as far as the hallway before the pain in her ribs sent her crumpling against the wall, gasping for breath. Dr. Ricci found her there, stubborn and pale, and guided her firmly back to bed. 2 weeks, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Minimum. You have fractured ribs, a healing concussion, and internal bruising that needs time to resolve. If you push yourself now, you risk permanent damage. I can't stay here for 2 weeks. I have a job, I have responsibilities. Sophie has school, Sophie is safe and being well cared for. Your job will wait. Your health cannot. Dr. Ricci's eyes softened. "Miss Winters, I've been a doctor for 30 years. I know stubbornness when I see it, but I also know when a body needs rest. Yours needs rest." Elena wanted to argue. Every instinct screamed at her to grab Sophie and run away from this mansion, away from this man whose name she was beginning to recognize from whispered news reports and hushed conversations. But then Sophie appeared in the doorway, her blue eyes wide with worry. "Please, Elena, I like it here. Mr. Dominic is nice, and you need to get better." Her lower lip trembled. "I was so scared when you were asleep. I don't want you to get hurt again." Elena looked at her sister, this tiny person who had already lost so much, who had spent 2 terrifying days not knowing if she was alive or dead, and felt her resistance crumble. "Okay," she whispered. 2 weeks. And so the days began to pass. Elena watched everything with the cautious eyes of a woman who had learned early that the world was not kind. She noted the guards at every entrance, the expensive artwork on the walls, the way servants moved silently through the halls. She understood what this place was, what Dominic Salvatore was, but she also noticed other things, things that didn't fit the image of a ruthless crime boss. She noticed how Dominic spoke to his staff with respect, never raising his voice, always using their names. She noticed that despite the obvious wealth, there was no evidence of drugs anywhere in the estate. One evening, she overheard a guard mention that the boss had strict rules about such things. No drugs, no trafficking, no harming of women or children, ever. And she noticed how he was with Sophie. It started small. Dominic teaching Sophie to play chess in the library, his deep voice patient as he explained how each piece moved. Sophie's delighted laughter when she accidentally captured his queen. The way Dominic let her win without making it obvious. Then it grew. He showed her his collection of rare books, lifting her up so she could see the ones on higher shelves. He let her explore the gardens despite the cold, walking beside her as she marveled at the frozen fountains. He actually listened when she talked about school, about her friends, about the purple bedroom Elena had painted for her. One afternoon, Elena stood at the window of her room, watching them in the garden below. Sophie was trying to build a snowman, and Dominic, terrifying, Powerful Dominic Salvatore was helping her roll a ball of snow, his expensive coat getting wet, his dignified image completely abandoned. Sophie said something Elena couldn't hear, and Dominic laughed. Actually laughed. The sound carried up to her window, and Elena felt something shift in her chest. "Why do you live alone in this big house?" Sophie asked him later that evening. Elena was resting on a couch nearby, pretending to read, but listening to every word. Dominic was quiet for a moment. "Because I don't have anyone to share it with. That's sad." Sophie's voice was matter-of-fact. "You should find someone. Maybe someday. Elena is really nice, and she's pretty, and she makes the best pancakes." Elena felt her cheeks flush. She kept her eyes firmly on her book, but she could feel Dominic's gaze drift toward her. She didn't look up. That night, lying in bed, Elena stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of what she was feeling. This man was dangerous. His world was violence and shadows. Every rational thought told her to keep her distance. But when she closed her eyes, she saw him laughing with Sophie. She saw his face when he looked at her sister, tender, protective, almost wistful. She saw the loneliness behind those steel-gray eyes. Elena told herself she was only staying for Sophie's sake, but every time Dominic walked into the room, every time their eyes met across the dining table, she felt something dangerous stirring in her chest, something she'd sworn never to feel again. Sleep wouldn't come. Elena lay in the darkness for hours, listening to Sophie's soft breathing in the bed beside her. Her ribs ached, her head throbbed, but it wasn't the pain keeping her awake. It was the thoughts spinning endlessly, refusing to quiet. Finally, she gave up. Careful not to wake Sophie, she slipped out of bed, wrapped a robe around her shoulders, and made her way downstairs. The mansion was silent at this hour, the hallways lit only by dim sconces that cast long shadows on the walls. Elena moved quietly, following the faint glow coming from the kitchen. She stopped in the doorway. Dominic sat alone at the marble island, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He'd removed his jacket and rolled up his sleeves, and in the soft light, he looked almost vulnerable, human. The hard lines of his face had softened, and his eyes, those steel-gray eyes, held a faraway look, the look of a man lost in memories he couldn't escape. He sensed her presence before she spoke. His head turned, and for a moment, they simply looked at each other. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked quietly. "No." Elena hesitated, then stepped into the kitchen. "You either, it seems. Sleep and I have never been good friends." She moved to the island, pulling out a stool across from him. He reached for a second glass without asking, poured 2 fingers of whiskey, and slid it toward her. "For the pain," he said. Elena took a small sip. The whiskey burned, but it was a good burn, warming. Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people who understood that some things couldn't be rushed. "Tell me about yourself," Dominic said finally. "The real story, not what's in the reports." Elena looked down at her glass. "What do you want to know?" "Everything." She took a breath, and then, for reasons she couldn't explain, she told him. "My parents died when I was 22, car accident on the interstate." Sophie was only 1 year old. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. "I had a full scholarship to medical school. I was going to be a surgeon. But after they died, there was no one else. No family, no savings, nothing. Just me and a baby who needed someone. So you gave it up. I deferred the scholarship, told myself I'd go back eventually. But," she shrugged, "life happened. Nursing school was faster, more practical. Sophie needed food, clothes, a roof. Dreams could wait. And now?" Elena smiled sadly. "Now she's 6, and I can't imagine doing anything else. Sophie is everything to me. I'd die for her." The words hung in the air. Dominic stared at her, something raw and unguarded in his expression. "I had a sister too," he said quietly. "Isabella." Elena looked up. "Had?" "She died. 15 years ago. Leukemia." His jaw tightened. "She was 8 years old. I was 22, same age you were when you lost your parents. I had money, power, connections. I thought I could fix anything." He took a long drink of whiskey, "But I couldn't fix her." Elena's heart clenched. "Dominic, I was supposed to protect her. That was my job. My only job that mattered." His voice was barely a whisper. "I failed. You didn't, I did." He looked at her then, and Elena saw the 15 years of guilt carved into his features. "Since then, I've built an empire. More money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. More power than most men dream of. But empires don't keep you warm at night. They don't fill the silence. They don't make the memories fade." Without thinking, Elena reached across the island and placed her hand over his. Dominic went still. He stared at her hand, small and warm against his scarred knuckles, as if he'd forgotten what human touch felt like. "You didn't fail your sister," Elena said softly. "Sometimes life is just cruel. There's no reason, no justice. It just is." She squeezed his hand. "But what you did for Sophie, finding her, helping her, bringing her to me, you saved her. You saved us both." Dominic raised his eyes to hers. In that moment, the walls he'd built over 15 years seemed to crack. Just a little. Just enough. "I know what you are," Elena continued quietly. "I know the world you live in, and I know I shouldn't be here. I should take Sophie and run as far as possible. Then why don't you?" It was a genuine question. No manipulation, no pressure. Just honest curiosity. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe because you're the first person who's helped us without wanting something in return." Dominic shook his head slowly. "I'm not asking for anything, Elena. I just want you to stay. Let me keep you safe. Both of you. That's all." She should have said no. She should have taken Sophie and run as far as possible. But when Dominic looked at her like that, like she was the first real thing he'd seen in years, Elena found herself nodding. And she knew, in that moment, she was already lost. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Dominic's study, but there was no warmth in the room. Marco stood before the desk, his face grim, a manila folder clutched in his hands. "You're not gonna like this, boss." Dominic leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "I rarely like anything you bring me, Marco. Just tell me." Marco opened the folder and spread several photographs across the desk. Traffic camera images, grainy but clear enough. A dark sedan, a license plate, a face behind the wheel. "The accident wasn't an accident," Marco said flatly. "Elena Winters was targeted." Dominic's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He picked up one of the photographs, studying the driver's face. "Recognize him?" Marco continued. "Petrov, low-level enforcer for the Kozlov organization. Viktor Kozlov." The name sent a cold wave through Dominic's chest. The Russian had been pushing into Chicago for months, testing boundaries, probing weaknesses. They'd had skirmishes before, territorial disputes, supply chain conflicts, but nothing that had escalated to open war. Until now. "Why Elena?" Dominic asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "She's a nurse. She has nothing to do with our world." Marco pulled out another document. A week before the accident, Elena was working the night shift in the ER. Around 2 a.m., she went to get supplies from a storage room and walked in on something she shouldn't have seen. What? A drug exchange. One of the hospital doctors, a guy named Patterson, has been funneling prescription medications to the Russians. Painkillers mostly. High-value stuff. Marco paused. Elena saw Viktor himself making the pickup. Dominic closed his eyes. A random moment, a wrong turn, and Elena Winters had become a witness to a crime that could put Viktor Kozlov behind bars for decades. "She probably didn't even realize what she saw," Marco continued. "But Viktor doesn't take chances. He ordered the hit the next day. And now?" Dominic's voice was ice. "Does he know where she is?" Marco hesitated. That hesitation told Dominic everything. "He knows she's here. With you." Marco met his boss's eyes. "Word travels fast in our world. The great Dominic Salvatore taking in a wounded woman and her little sister, people talk. Viktor sees this as an opportunity. An opportunity for what? To get to you, he thinks." Marco paused, choosing his words carefully. "He thinks she's your weakness." The words hung in the air like smoke. Dominic stood abruptly, walking to the window. Outside, he could see Sophie playing in the garden, one of his guards watching from a respectful distance. Elena sat on a bench nearby, wrapped in a blanket, laughing at something Sophie had said. A weakness. Was that what they were? "Triple the security," Dominic ordered. "I want men at every entrance, every window. No one enters or leaves without my explicit approval. And Elena doesn't set foot outside this estate until Viktor Kozlov is no longer a threat." "Understood. And Marco?" Dominic turned, and his eyes were the cold steel that had built his empire. "Find Viktor. I want to know where he sleeps, where he eats, who he talks to. Everything." After Marco left, Dominic remained at the window, watching Elena and Sophie. He knew he had to tell her. She deserved to know why her life had been upended, why someone had tried to kill her. He found her in the library an hour later, alone. Sophie had gone for a nap. Elena looked up when he entered, and her smile faded when she saw his expression. "What's wrong?" Dominic sat across from her and told her everything. The drug exchange, Viktor Kozlov, the hit that was meant to silence her permanently. Elena's face went pale. Her hands trembled in her lap. "This is my fault," she whispered. "I saw something I shouldn't have, and now I'm putting everyone in danger. You, Sophie, your entire household." She stood abruptly. "I should leave. If I go, Victor will follow me, and you'll be safe. If you leave, Victor will find you within a day." Dominic's voice was firm. "You won't make it to the city limits before his men catch you. The only safe place for you is here, with me." "Why?" Elena's voice cracked. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Why risk everything for a stranger?" Dominic was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because in 15 years, you're the first person who made me feel like I'm more than a monster." Elena stared at him. Tears glistened in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "Dominic, stay," he said. "Please, let me protect you. Let me protect both of you." She wanted to argue. He could see it in her face. But something in his eyes, the raw honesty, the vulnerability he never showed anyone, made her stop. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll stay." Outside the Salvatore estate, a black SUV sat in the darkness. Inside, Alexei Volkov spoke into his phone, his cold eyes fixed on the lit windows of the mansion. "The woman is valuable to him, even more than we thought." He paused, listening. "Tell Victor we move in 3 days." Despite the danger lurking beyond the gates, something unexpected began to bloom within the walls of the Salvatore estate. The days took on a rhythm: quiet mornings, shared meals, evenings in the library where Sophie would read aloud from her favorite books while Dominic and Elena listened. It wasn't the life any of them had planned, but somehow, it felt right. Sophie had completely adopted Dominic. She followed him everywhere, chattering endlessly about school, about her favorite cartoons, about the dreams she had at night. She'd started calling him Mr. Dom, and the nickname had stuck. Even the guards had begun to smile when they heard her small voice echoing through the halls, demanding that Mr. Dom come see the snowman she'd built, or play chess with her, or read her a bedtime story. And Dominic, the fearsome, untouchable Dominic Salvatore, did all of it, without complaint, without hesitation. One afternoon, Elena watched from the doorway as Dominic sat with Sophie in the game room, a chessboard between them. Sophie was losing badly, but she didn't seem to mind. She was too busy asking questions. "Mr. Dom, do you like my sister?" Dominic moved his knight without looking up. "Of course I do." "No, I mean like." Sophie's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "Like in the movies. Like when the prince kisses the princess." Elena felt her cheeks flush. She should announce her presence, interrupt this conversation before it went any further, but her feet wouldn't move. Dominic's hand froze over the chessboard. Even from across the room, Elena could see the faint color rising in his face. "Sophie, it's okay if you do." Sophie reached across the board and patted his hand. "Elena needs someone to take care of her sometimes. She always takes care of everyone else. She never lets anyone take care of her." Dominic was silent for a long moment. Then he looked up, and his eyes met Elena's across the room. She couldn't breathe. That evening, after Sophie had been tucked into bed, Dominic found Elena in the hallway outside her room. "Come with me," he said quietly. "There's something I want to show you." He led her up a narrow staircase she hadn't noticed before, through a door, and out onto a rooftop terrace. Chicago spread out before them like a sea of lights, glittering, endless, breathtaking. Elena gasped. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "I've lived here my whole life, but I've never seen it like this." Dominic stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "When you have power, you see the world differently. Sometimes better, sometimes worse. Which is this?" He turned to look at her, and something in his expression made her heart stutter. "Better," he said softly. "Definitely better." The wind picked up, cold and sharp, and Elena shivered. Without a word, Dominic removed his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. His hands lingered, warm against her arms. "Elena." "Yes?" He didn't answer with words. Instead, he reached up and touched her face, his fingers gentle against her cheek. She could feel him trembling, this powerful man who commanded an empire, trembling at the thought of touching her. He leaned down, slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. His lips stopped just before hers, a breath apart, a question unasked. Elena answered it. She closed the distance, pressing her lips to his. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, like the first notes of a song neither of them knew the melody to. Then Dominic's arms wrapped around her, pulling her closer, and the kiss deepened into something raw and real and aching with longing. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard. Elena pressed her forehead against his chest. "This is insane," she murmured. You're not just anything." Dominic tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You're the strongest person I've ever met. You gave up everything for your sister. You faced down a world that tried to break you, and you didn't break. Don't ever call yourself just anything." "What happens when this is over?" Elena asked. "When Victor is gone and the danger has passed? What happens to us?" Dominic was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled her close again, tucking her head beneath his chin. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know I don't want to lose you. Either of you." Elena closed her eyes, letting herself sink into his warmth. For the first time in 5 years, she didn't feel alone. For the first time since her parents died, she felt like someone was carrying the weight alongside her. For one perfect moment, standing under the stars with Dominic's arms around her, Elena allowed herself to believe in happy endings. She didn't know that across the city, Viktor Kozlov was finalizing his plan, and that in 48 hours, her world would shatter all over again. 2 days later, Elena made a request that Dominic dreaded. "I need to go to the hospital," she said over breakfast. Sophie was still asleep upstairs, and they were alone in the dining room. "There's a specific medication Dr. Ricci prescribed, but it requires my signature and ID to pick up. It's controlled. They won't release it to anyone else." Dominic's jaw tightened. "Send someone to," I tried explaining. "Hospital policy. I have to be there in person." Elena reached across the table and touched his hand. "I'll be careful. I'll take your guards. I just need 30 minutes. Every instinct screamed at him to refuse. Victor was out there, watching, waiting, but Elena's eyes held that stubborn determination he'd come to recognize and admire. 4 men, Dominic said finally, "armed, and you stay in the vehicle unless absolutely necessary." Elena nodded. "Thank you." He caught her hand before she could pull away. "Come back to me." She smiled, that warm, genuine smile that had somehow become the center of his universe. "I will." The drive to Chicago General was uneventful. Elena sat in the back of the armored SUV, flanked by 2 guards, while 2 more followed in a second vehicle. The snow had stopped falling, but the streets were still white, the city muffled beneath its winter blanket. She was inside the hospital for exactly 22 minutes. When she emerged, prescription in hand, she felt a small wave of relief. Almost done, almost safe. They never made it back to the estate. The ambush came 3 blocks from the hospital. A delivery truck blocked the intersection ahead. Before the driver could reverse, 2 black SUVs appeared behind them, boxing them in. Then the shooting started. Elena screamed as bullets shattered the windows. Glass exploded around her, and the guards shoved her down, covering her body with their own. The sound was deafening gunfire, shouting, the screech of tires. "Go, go, go," one of the guards yelled into his radio. "We're under attack. Multiple hostiles. Request immediate," his words cut off in a spray of red. The door was wrenched open. Hands grabbed Elena, dragging her from the vehicle. She fought, kicking, scratching, screaming, but there were too many of them. 20 men at least, armed and ruthless. A face appeared above her. Cold eyes, a cruel smile. Alexei Volkov. "Hello." "Miss Winters." His fist connected with her temple, and the world went black. When Elena woke, she was in darkness. Her head throbbed. Blood trickled down her forehead, warm and sticky. Her hands were bound behind her back, the rope biting into her wrists. The air smelled of rust and decay, an abandoned warehouse, she realized. Somewhere industrial. Somewhere no one would hear her scream. Footsteps echoed on concrete. A light clicked on, blinding her. "Miss Winters, what a pleasure." Viktor Kozlov stepped into the light. He was older than she'd expected, mid-40s, with silver-streaked hair and a face that might have been handsome, if not for the cruelty etched into every line. His suit was expensive, his shoes polished. He looked like a businessman. He smiled like a predator. "Do you know why you're here?" he asked pleasantly. Elena lifted her chin, meeting his gaze despite the fear clawing at her chest. "Because you're a coward who can't face Dominic directly." The slap came fast and hard, snapping her head to the side. Pain exploded across her cheek. "Brave." Victor's voice was amused. "I see why he likes you, but bravery won't save you, Miss Winters. Nothing will save you except perhaps your lover's cooperation." He pulled out a phone and dialed. The call connected on the first ring. "Dominic, my old friend." Victor's smile widened. "I have something of yours." At the Salvatore estate, Dominic stood frozen, the phone pressed to his ear. Sophie was beside him in the study, coloring quietly, unaware of the nightmare unfolding. Victor. Dominic's voice was ice. If you've hurt her. Hurt her? Oh, Dominic, we're just getting started. Victor nodded to Alexei. The enforcer grabbed Elena's hair, yanking her head back, and drove his fist into her stomach. Elena's scream tore through the phone line. Dominic's face went white. His hand gripped the phone so hard the casing cracked. Elena. Beautiful, isn't it? Victor chuckled. The sound of weakness, the great Dominic Salvatore, brought low by a woman. What do you want? The north side. All of it. Your entire territory. Signed over to me. Victor paused. You have 24 hours. If I don't have what I want by then, I'll send her back to you in pieces, starting with her fingers. The line went dead. Sophie looked up from her coloring book, her blue eyes wide with confusion and fear. Mr. Dom, what's wrong? Where's Elena? Dominic knelt down, taking her small hands in his. His own hands were shaking. Elena is... She's in trouble, Sophie, but I'm going to bring her back. I promise. Promise? I promise. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. Dominic Salvatore never breaks his promise. Marco appeared in the doorway, his face grim. Boss, I just got word. 3 of our men are dead. The 4th managed to call in before. He didn't finish. Dominic stood. When he turned to face Marco, his eyes were no longer human. They were cold, empty, the eyes of a man who had nothing left to lose. Gather everyone, he said quietly. Every soldier, every gun, every resource we have. Boss, what do we do? Dominic's voice was steel, wrapped in velvet. We go to war. Dominic Salvatore had built his reputation on cold calculation, on never letting emotions cloud his judgment. But as Elena's scream echoed in his ears, he felt something he hadn't felt in 15 years, the kind of rage that burned cities to the ground. Victor Kozlov had made a fatal mistake. He'd touched what belonged to Dominic, and he would pay with everything he had. Within 2 hours, the Salvatore estate had transformed into a war room. 50 men gathered in the main hall, the most loyal, the most skilled, the ones who had proven themselves through blood and fire. They stood in grim silence, weapons checked and loaded, waiting for their orders. These were men who had killed before and would kill again without hesitation. But tonight, there was something different in their eyes. This wasn't business. This was personal. Dominic stood at the head of the room, a tactical map spread across the table before him. His face was carved from stone, but beneath the surface, a fury burned hotter than anything he'd ever known. Victor Kozlov is holding Elena Winters at an abandoned warehouse on the south side, Dominic announced. Industrial district, near the old meatpacking plants. Our intel confirms approximately 30 armed hostiles on site. Marco stepped forward, pointing to the map. We've identified 3 entry points. Main entrance here, loading dock on the east side, and a service door on the north. Victor's men are concentrated on the ground floor. Elena is being held on the 2nd level. Our objective is simple, Dominic continued. Get Elena out alive. Everything else is secondary. His eyes swept across the room. Victor dies tonight. Anyone who stands between us and Elena dies tonight. No prisoners. No mercy. A murmur of assent rippled through the assembled men. Before the final preparations began, Dominic slipped away to find Sophie. She was in the library, curled up in the same armchair where she'd spent so many hours reading with Elena. Her teddy bear was clutched to her chest, and tears streamed silently down her face. Mr. Dom? Her voice was small, broken. Is Elena going to be okay? Dominic crossed the room and knelt before her, bringing himself to her eye level. He took her small hands in his, feeling how cold they were, how fragile. Sophie, listen to me. His voice was gentle but firm. Your sister is the bravest person I know. She's strong, and she's fighting, and I am going to bring her back to you. But what if the bad men hurt you? Sophie's lower lip trembled. What if you don't come back either? Dominic felt his chest tighten. This little girl had already lost so much: her parents, her sense of safety, nearly her sister. The thought of adding to her pain was unbearable. I'm coming back, he said firmly. I promise. Promise? I promise. And Dominic Salvatore never breaks his promise. Sophie threw her arms around his neck, hugging him with all the strength her small body possessed. Her tears soaked into his collar, and Dominic held her close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, memorizing the feel of her tiny frame against his. I love you, Mr. Dom, she whispered. Please don't die. Dominic closed his eyes. When was the last time anyone had said those words to him? When was the last time he'd allowed himself to feel them? I love you too, little one. His voice cracked on the words. Take care of your teddy bear until I get back. Elena and I will be home before you know it. He left her in the care of 3 trusted guards and Dr. Ricci, with strict instructions that nothing, absolutely nothing, was to happen to her. Back in the war room, Marco pulled him aside. "Boss, you know this is a trap. Victor wants you to come. He's expecting this exact response." "I know." Then why Dominic turned to face his oldest friend, and Marco saw something in his eyes he'd never seen before. Not rage, not calculation, but something deeper. Something almost sacred. Because some things are worth walking into a trap for. Marco stared at him for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Then we walk into it together." The men began to move out, loading into vehicles, checking weapons one final time, steeling themselves for the battle ahead. Dominic lingered for just a moment, reaching into his pocket and pulling out his wallet. Inside was a photograph he'd placed there just days ago, Elena and Sophie in the garden, smiling, the snow falling around them like confetti. He traced Elena's face with his thumb. "Wait for me," he whispered. Then he tucked the wallet away, checked his weapon, and walked out into the night. As 50 black SUVs rolled out of the Salvatore estate, heading toward the south side, Chicago's underworld held its breath. Everyone knew what was coming. The most powerful mafia boss in the city was going to war for a woman, and God help anyone who stood in his way. The small room on the 2nd floor of the warehouse had become Elena's prison. Concrete walls, no windows, a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting harsh shadows across the blood-stained floor. Her blood. She'd lost track of how many times Alexei had hit her, how many questions Victor had asked, how many hours had crawled by in this nightmare. Her hands were still bound behind her back, the rope cutting into raw skin. Her ribs screamed with every breath, some of them broken now, she was sure. Blood dripped from a cut above her eye, and her lip was split and swollen. But she hadn't broken. She wouldn't break. Victor circled her chair like a shark, his polished shoes clicking against the concrete with each step. "You're making this so much harder than it needs to be, Miss Winters." His voice was almost gentle, reasonable, the voice of a man discussing weather, not torture. "I'm not asking for much. Just a few details about Dominic's operation, security codes, guard rotations, the location of his safe houses." Elena said nothing. She kept her eyes fixed on a crack in the wall, letting her mind drift somewhere far away from this room. Victor sighed and nodded to Alexei. The blow caught her across the face, snapping her head to the side. Stars exploded behind her eyes. She tasted blood, fresh and copper bright. "Why protect him?" Victor crouched down, bringing his face level with hers. "He's a criminal, Miss Winters, a monster, a man who has killed more people than you've probably met in your entire sheltered little life. Why would you suffer for someone like that?" Elena turned her head slowly, meeting Victor's cold gaze with her own. "He may be a criminal," she said, her voice hoarse but steady, "but he has more honor in one finger than you have in your entire body." Victor's eyes narrowed. Then he laughed a cold, hollow sound that echoed off the bare walls. "Honor? Oh, my dear, you're even more naive than I thought." He stood, brushing dust from his trousers. "Do you really believe he'll come for you? That he'll sacrifice his empire, everything he spent decades building, for a woman he's known for a few weeks? Yes. He'll leave you to die, Miss Winters. That's what men like us do. We calculate. We weigh costs and benefits. And you simply aren't worth enough." Elena lifted her chin, ignoring the pain that lanced through her jaw. "Then I'll die knowing I didn't betray someone I love." The words hung in the air between them. Victor stared at her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. Then he shook his head. "Love, how disappointing." He turned to Alexei. "Continue, but keep her alive. She's useless to me, dead, at least until Salvatore arrives." As Alexei approached, cracking his knuckles, Elena closed her eyes and let her mind escape. She thought of Dominic. The way he'd looked at her that first night in the hospital, with such careful concern, the patience he showed Sophie, teaching her chess, reading her stories, letting her win at games without making it obvious, the sound of his laugh so rare, so precious, echoing through the halls of his mansion. She thought of their kiss on the rooftop, the way his hands had trembled when he touched her face, the raw vulnerability in his eyes when he'd said he didn't want to lose her. She thought of Sophie, probably crying right now, asking Mr. Dom where her sister was. Pain exploded across her back as Alexei struck her again. She bit down on her lip, refusing to scream, refusing to give them that satisfaction. "I was wrong about him," she thought through the haze of agony. "I was wrong about everything. I thought he was a monster, but he's the most human person I've ever met." Another blow. Her vision went white at the edges. "If I die here, at least I know what real love feels like. At least I had that." But even as the thought formed, Something fiercer rose up within her. No, I'm not ready to die. Not yet. Sophie needs me. And Dominic. Dominic is coming. I know he is. In the room below, Victor conferred with his lieutenants. The warehouse was surrounded by 30 armed men, his best, most ruthless soldiers. Every entrance was covered. Every approach was watched. Salvatore will come, Victor said confidently. His weakness is too great. He'll walk right into our trap. And when he does? One of his men asked. Victor smiled the cold, satisfied smile of a predator about to close its jaws. We kill him. We kill the woman. And by morning, the entire Salvatore empire will be mine. Upstairs, Elena hung her head, fighting to stay conscious. The blood loss was making her dizzy. The pain was becoming a distant roar, almost manageable. She wondered how much more her body could take. Then she heard it. A sound in the distance. Not thunder, too rhythmic, too controlled. Engines, dozens of them. Then the gunshots started. The building shook. Shouts erupted from below, panicked, chaotic. More gunfire, closer now. An explosion somewhere on the ground floor sent dust raining from the ceiling. And through the chaos, cutting through the noise like a blade through silk, Elena heard a voice she'd know anywhere. Elena! Dominic! Tears streamed down her battered face, mixing with the blood. Dominic had come for her. The war had begun. The convoy hit the warehouse district like a storm. 50 black SUVs converged from 3 directions, east, west, and north, surrounding the industrial complex in a coordinated assault that left Victor's men scrambling. The element of surprise was devastating. Before the Russians could fully organize their defense, Dominic's soldiers were already breaching the perimeter. Gunfire erupted across the south side, shattering the winter silence. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness like lightning, and the sharp crack of automatic weapons echoed off the abandoned buildings. Glass shattered. Men screamed. Bodies fell. Dominic led the main assault team through the front entrance, his weapon raised, his eyes cold and focused. He moved with lethal precision, 2 shots, 2 kills clearing the doorway before his men poured in behind him. Marco flanked him, covering his blind spots. Their movements synchronized from years of fighting side by side. But tonight was different. Tonight, Dominic wasn't fighting for territory or power or respect. He was fighting for something far more precious. Push forward, Dominic commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. 2nd floor. Elena is on the 2nd floor. The warehouse had become a hellscape. Smoke billowed from flash grenades. Blood pooled on the concrete floor. Victor's men tried to hold their positions, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Dominic's army swept through them like a tide, unstoppable, merciless. A bullet grazed Dominic's shoulder, tearing through fabric and flesh. He barely flinched. The pain was nothing, a distant inconvenience compared to the fire burning in his chest. He pressed forward, stepping over bodies, his weapon never wavering. "Boss, you're hit!" Marco shouted. "I'm fine. Keep moving." They reached the stairwell. 3 of Victor's men guarded the bottom, their weapons trained on the doorway. Dominic didn't hesitate. He rolled a flashbang around the corner, waited for the detonation, then surged through the smoke. 3 shots. 3 bodies crumpled to the ground. The stairs stretched upward into darkness. Somewhere above, Elena was waiting. Somewhere above, Victor was preparing his final move. On the 2nd floor, chaos reigned. Victor grabbed Alexei by the collar. "Get the woman. Take her to the roof. Now! But the men are dying." Victor's composure cracked, fury twisting his features. "Salvatore's here, and he's tearing through our defenses like paper. The woman is our only leverage. Move." Alexei didn't argue. He burst into Elena's cell and grabbed her by the hair, dragging her to her feet. Elena screamed from pain, from rage, and fought with everything she had left. "Let me go." She twisted, kicked, clawed at his arms. Alexei backhanded her across the face. "Shut up and move." He dragged her toward the back stairwell, the one leading to the roof. Elena's bound hands made it impossible to fight effectively, but she refused to go quietly. She threw her weight against him, stumbled deliberately, did everything she could to slow their progress. On the 3rd step, she saw her chance. She lunged forward and sank her teeth into Alexei's forearm, biting down with all her strength. He howled in pain and released her hair. Elena fell, tumbling down several steps, her ribs screaming in agony. But she was free, if only for a moment. "You little bitch." Alexei seized her again, blood dripping from his wounded arm. He pressed his gun against her temple. "Try that again, and I'll put a bullet in your brain, leverage or not." He hauled her up the remaining stairs and kicked open the door to the roof. Cold wind slammed into them. Snow swirled in the darkness. The sounds of battle rose from below, gunshots, explosions, the screams of dying men. Alexei dragged Elena to the center of the roof and forced her to her knees, his gun still pressed to her head. "Now we wait," he snarled. "Your lover boy will come." And when he does, the rooftop door burst open. Dominic stood in the doorway, his weapon raised, his chest heaving. Blood soaked his left shoulder, and his face was splattered with the evidence of battle. But his eyes, those steel-gray eyes, burned with a fury that made even Alexei hesitate. "Let her go." Dominic's voice was barely human, a growl, a promise of death. Alexei pulled Elena closer, pressing the gun harder against her skull. "One more step, Salvatore, and she dies. Drop your weapon, now." Dominic froze. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The wind howled around them. Snow swirled in the darkness. Below, the sounds of gunfire began to fade as Dominic's men finished their work. "Dominic, don't!" Elena's voice was hoarse, desperate. "Just go. Leave me, please." His eyes met hers. In them, she saw everything, the fear, the rage, the love he'd never spoken aloud. "I'm not leaving without you." Slowly, deliberately, he lowered his weapon and let it fall to the ground. "There," he said quietly. "It's done. Now let her go." Alexei laughed, a cold, ugly sound. "You think I'm stupid? You think I'll just—" In that moment, time seemed to freeze. Alexei's finger on the trigger. Elena's eyes not afraid, but full of love. And Dominic, the most feared man in Chicago, standing helpless. Then Elena moved. Elena threw her body backward with every ounce of strength she had left. Her elbow drove into Alexei's stomach hard, precise, exactly where she knew it would hurt the most. 5 years of self-defense classes, taken after her parents died because she'd sworn no one would ever make her feel helpless again. She'd never imagined using them like this. Alexei grunted in pain, his grip loosening for just a fraction of a second. His gun hand jerked upward as his finger reflexively squeezed the trigger. The shot went wild, screaming past Elena's ear and disappearing into the night sky. It was all the opening Dominic needed. He crossed the distance between them in 3 explosive strides. His fist connected with Alexei's jaw with a sickening crack, snapping the man's head to the side. Before Alexei could recover, Dominic seized his gun arm, twisted, and wrenched the weapon free. Alexei stumbled backward, blood pouring from his mouth, his eyes wide with sudden fear. He raised his hands. Wait, we can make a deal." Dominic pressed the gun to Alexei's forehead. His hand was steady, his voice was ice. "This is for touching her." The shot echoed across the rooftop. Alexei crumpled to the ground and didn't move again. Dominic let the gun fall and turned to Elena. In 2 steps, he was beside her, his hands cupping her battered face, his eyes searching hers with desperate intensity. Elena, look at me." His voice cracked. "Are you okay? Did they hurt you? Tell me where Dominic." She was crying now, tears streaming down her bloody, bruised face. "You came. I knew you'd come. I knew it." He pulled her against his chest, wrapping his arms around her so tightly she could barely breathe. She didn't care. She buried her face in his shoulder and sobbed from relief, from pain, from the overwhelming rush of emotions she couldn't begin to name. "I'd walk through hell for you," he murmured against her hair. "I'd burn down the whole world. Don't you know that by now?" She pulled back just enough to look at him, this man who had killed for her, who had walked into a trap knowing it could cost him everything. The snow swirled around them, and the sounds of the dying battle faded into the background. For one perfect moment, there was nothing but the 2 of them. Elena kissed him. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate, fierce, a collision of fear and relief, and love too powerful to contain. Dominic kissed her back with equal intensity, his hands tangled in her hair, her blood smearing across his face. Neither of them heard the door open. How touching. They broke apart. Viktor Kozlov stood in the rooftop doorway, a gun in his hand, his expensive suit torn and blood-stained. His face was twisted with rage, the expression of a man who had lost everything and had nothing left to lose. "The monster in love," Viktor sneered. "I never thought I'd see the day." Dominic pushed Elena behind him, shielding her with his body. His hand reached for his fallen weapon, but Viktor raised his gun first. "Don't bother. You should have taken my deal, Dominic. You should have given me what I wanted. Now you both die." Viktor fired. Dominic fired at the same instant, the weapon he'd retrieved from Alexei's body barking in his hand. 2 shots, 2 impacts. Viktor's bullet caught Dominic in the abdomen. He felt it tear through him, white-hot agony that stole his breath and buckled his knees. Dominic's bullet caught Viktor in the chest. The Russian's eyes went wide. He looked down at the bloom of red spreading across his white shirt, then back up at Dominic. Impossible, he whispered. Then he collapsed. Dominic fell a heartbeat later. Dominic! Elena scrambled to his side, her bound hands fumbling against his body. So much blood poured from the wound in his stomach, pooling on the snow-covered rooftop. No, no, no! She pressed her hands against the wound, trying to stop the flow, but it kept coming, seeping through her fingers, warm and terrible. Stay with me, Dominic, stay with me. His eyes found hers. They were fading, the steel gray growing dim, but there was no fear in them, only peace, only love. He reached up with a trembling hand and touched her face. His fingers left trails of blood on her cheek. You're safe, he whispered. That's all that matters. No, don't you dare. Don't you dare leave me. But his hand fell away. His eyes fluttered closed. Elena screamed his name into the night, but he didn't respond. The rooftop door burst open again. Marco charged through, weapon drawn, 4 men behind him. He took in the scene in an instant. Victor's body crumpled near the doorway. Alexei sprawled in a pool of blood, and Elena kneeling over Dominic's motionless form. Boss! Marco sprinted across the rooftop. What happened? He's not dead. Elena's voice was fierce, desperate. He's not dead. He can't be dead. Her hands were pressed against Dominic's abdomen, trying to stem the flow of blood that kept seeping between her fingers. Her own injuries were forgotten, the broken ribs, the cuts, the bruises. Nothing mattered except the man lying beneath her hands. Marco dropped to his knees beside them, checking Dominic's pulse. His face was grim. He's alive, but barely. He looked up at his men. Get the medical kit, now, and bring the car around. We need to move him immediately. The next minutes blurred together in a haze of blood and fear. Elena refused to leave Dominic's side as they carried him down through the warehouse, past the bodies of fallen enemies, out into the cold night air. She kept her hands pressed to his wound the entire time, as if she could hold his life inside him through sheer force of will. They loaded him into the back of an SUV. Elena climbed in beside him, cradling his head in her lap. Drive, Marco commanded. As fast as you can. Dr. Ricci is waiting. The convoy tore through the streets of Chicago, running red lights, scattering traffic. Elena stared down at Dominic's pale face, watching his chest rise and fall in shallow, stuttering breaths. Stay with me, she whispered. Please, please stay with me. Her phone, someone had given her a phone. She didn't remember who buzzed in her pocket. Sophie's face appeared on the screen. One of the guards must have let her call. Elena answered with bloody, trembling hands. Elena? Sophie's voice was small, terrified. Elena, are you okay? Where's Mr. Dom? Elena closed her eyes. She had to be strong. For Sophie, for Dominic. We're coming home, sweetheart. Mr. Dom is hurt, but he's going to be okay. Promise? The word hung in the air. The same word Sophie had asked Dominic before he'd left. The same word that had become a lifeline between them. Elena's voice trembled. I promise. They reached the estate in record time. Dr. Ricci was waiting at the entrance with a full surgical team, nurses, equipment, everything he needed. They rushed Dominic inside, straight to the medical suite that had been prepared for emergencies exactly like this. The doors closed behind them. Elena stood in the hallway, covered in blood, Dominic's, Alexei's, her own, and watched those doors with hollow eyes. Marco appeared beside her. Someone had cut the ropes from her wrists, and someone else had wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. She didn't remember any of it. The surgery will take time, Marco said quietly. You should sit. Let someone look at your injuries. I'm fine. Elena, I'm not leaving this hallway until he comes out of that room. Marco studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded and took up position beside her. They waited. 1 hour, 2, 3. Elena paced. She prayed, actually prayed, for the first time since her parents' funeral, to a God she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. Please, please don't take him. Not now. Not when we just found each other. Marco watched her, his own face lined with worry. He's the toughest man I know, he offered. He'll make it. Elena stopped pacing. Her voice was barely a whisper. He has to. Sophie can't lose anyone else. She swallowed hard. And neither can I. 4 hours. 5. Somewhere in the estate, Sophie sat in Dominic's bedroom, curled up in his massive chair. Her teddy bear was clutched to her chest, and she stared at a photograph on his nightstand, a picture of her and Dominic in the garden, both of them smiling. Please wake up, Mr. Dom, she whispered to the empty room. I need you. We all need you. At the 5-hour mark, the surgery doors finally opened. Dr. Ricci stepped out, pulling off his surgical mask. His face was exhausted but calm. Elena couldn't breathe. He's stable. Dr. Ricci allowed himself a small smile. The bullet missed his major organs by millimeters. Any closer and we would have lost him. He's a very lucky man. Elena's knees buckled. Marco caught her before she hit the floor, but she barely noticed. Sobs racked her body ugly. Violent sobs that she couldn't control and didn't try to. All the fear, all the terror, all the desperate hope poured out of her in a flood. "Can I see him?" she finally managed. "He's unconscious, and will be for some time. But yes, you can see him." When Elena walked into Dominic's room, she found Sophie already there. The little girl had somehow slipped past the guards and was perched on the edge of the bed, holding Dominic's hand in both of hers. She was singing softly the lullaby Elena used to sing to her when she was scared, when the nightmares came, when the world felt too big and too cruel. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word." Elena stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her face, watching the two people she loved most in the world, and in that moment, she made a decision. She was never letting go of either of them. 3 days passed like a held breath. Elena and Sophie never left Dominic's side. They slept in the armchairs beside his bed, took their meals in his room, and watched the steady beep of the monitors with anxious eyes. Dr. Ricci came and went, checking vitals, adjusting medications, assuring them that Dominic was healing, that his body just needed time. But time moved so slowly when you were waiting for someone to open their eyes. On the morning of the 3rd day, the first gray light of dawn crept through the curtains. Elena was curled in the armchair closest to the bed, her hand resting on Dominic's arm. Sophie was asleep in the chair beside her, her teddy bear tucked under her chin. Neither of them saw Dominic's eyes flutter open. He blinked slowly, his vision adjusting to the dim light. Everything hurt, a deep, throbbing ache that radiated from his core, but the pain meant he was alive. He tried to remember what had happened. The rooftop, Victor, the gun, Elena. He turned his head and saw her. Her face was peaceful in sleep, though dark circles shadowed her eyes and fading bruises still marked her skin. She was alive. She was here. Relief flooded through him, so powerful it stole his breath. He tried to sit up a mistake. Pain exploded through his abdomen, and a groan escaped his lips before he could stop it. Elena's eyes snapped open instantly. "You're awake!" She was on her feet in a heartbeat, her hands hovering over him, afraid to touch him. Don't move, you'll tear your stitches." "Elena." His voice was a rasp, barely recognizable. "Sophie, you're okay?" Tears sprang to her eyes. "Of course we're okay. Because of you, you idiot." She laughed and cried at the same time, her hands finally settling on his face, his chest, reassuring herself that he was real, that he was alive. The commotion woke Sophie. The little girl sat up, rubbing her eyes, confused. Then she saw Dominic looking back at her, and her face transformed into pure, radiant joy. Dom. She launched herself at the bed, scrambling up beside him. Elena caught her just in time. Careful. He's still hurt." But Sophie was already wrapping her arms around Dominic's neck, pressing her face against his shoulder. She was crying happy tears, relieved tears, and her small body shook with the force of her emotions. "You kept your promise," she sobbed. "You came back. You said you would, and you did." Dominic's arms came up to hold her, ignoring the pain the movement caused. He pressed his lips to the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her shampoo. "I told you," he murmured. Dominic Salvatore never breaks his promise. They stayed like that for a long moment, the three of them, tangled together on the bed, holding on to each other as if the world might try to tear them apart again. Eventually, one of the maids appeared in the doorway, and Elena gently extracted Sophie from Dominic's arms. "Go have breakfast, sweetheart. Mr. Dom needs to rest, and you need to eat something." Sophie looked reluctant to leave, but she nodded. She kissed Dominic's cheek, whispered, "I love you, Mr. Dom," and allowed herself to be led away. The room fell quiet. Elena sat on the edge of the bed, her hand finding Dominic's. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. They just looked at each other, cataloging every detail, confirming that this was real. "I thought I lost you," Dominic finally said. His voice was still rough, but stronger. "When they took you, when I heard you scream, I thought I lost you." Elena's voice cracked. "On that rooftop, when you fell, when you stopped responding. Don't ever do that again. Can't promise that." He squeezed her hand. "I'd do it 1,000 times for you. Dominic. Elena." He held her gaze with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I know who I am. I know what I am. This life isn't fair to ask you to be part of. The danger, The violence, the darkness. You deserve better. Sophie deserves better. Dominic, let me finish. He took a shaky breath. But I love you. I've never said that to anyone since Isabella died. I thought that part of me was gone forever. But I love you, and I love Sophie. And if you'll let me, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you both. Tears streamed down Elena's face. She didn't wipe them away. I love you too, she whispered. Both of us do. We have for a while now. Then stay. His voice was barely audible. Not as a guest. Not as someone I'm protecting. Stay as my family. Both of you. Elena leaned forward and kissed him soft, gentle, full of promise. Her lips lingered on his, and when she finally pulled back, she was smiling through her tears. We're not going anywhere, she whispered against his lips. We're home. 6 months had passed since that fateful night. Dominic had healed completely. The scar on his abdomen, a permanent reminder of how close he'd come to losing everything. The Salvatore Empire emerged stronger than ever with Viktor Kozlov gone, but something fundamental had shifted. Dominic began pulling back from the violent aspects of his business, focusing instead on legitimate investments. Elena had opened a free clinic in Chicago's poorest neighborhood, funded entirely by Dominic. She worked there 3 days a week, spending the rest of her time building a home at the estate. Sophie, now 7, attended the finest private school in the city, her confidence blooming like the summer roses in the garden. On a warm June evening, Dominic took Elena's hand. Come with me. There's something I want to show you. He led her to the rooftop terrace, their place, where they'd shared their first kiss. The city glittered below like scattered diamonds. Elena noticed Sophie standing nearby in a pink dress, holding roses. Marco stood beside her, smiling. Dominic? What? He took her hands. Then he knelt. Elena Winters, 6 months ago, you and your sister changed everything. You showed me that even someone like me deserves love. You made me believe in second chances. He opened a velvet box. A diamond ring sparkled in the twilight. I don't deserve you, but I'm selfish enough to ask anyway. Will you marry me? Elena laughed and cried simultaneously. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He slid the ring onto her finger and kissed her deeply. Sophie ran over. Does this mean Mr. Dom is my brother now? Dominic knelt, pulling her close. No, little one. It means I'm going to be your family. Your real family. I already knew that. Fireworks exploded overhead, Marco's surprise painting the sky gold and silver. As fireworks suddenly lit up the Chicago sky, Dominic held his 2 girls close. The most feared man in the city, brought to his knees by a brave nurse and her precocious little sister. And he wouldn't have it any other way. 3 months later, the Salvatore estate transformed into a fairy tale. 200 guests filled the grand ballroom adorned with white flowers and crystal chandeliers. In the bridal suite, Elena stood before the mirror in a simple white silk dress. Sophie bounced beside her in pink. Elena, you look like a princess. Elena knelt down, adjusting Sophie's flower crown. And you look like my beautiful little fairy. At the altar, Dominic waited with trembling hands. Marco stood beside him. Nervous, terrified, scared of being happy, scared it'll disappear. The music began. Elena appeared in the doorway. Dominic forgot to breathe. She walked down the aisle, Sophie carefully holding her train. When she reached him, their eyes locked with 1,000 unspoken promises. Dominic spoke his vows. I vow to protect you, to love you, and to spend every day earning the gift of your love. Elena responded through tears. I vow to be your partner, your light, and your home, always. I now pronounce you husband and wife. Their kiss sealed everything. Sophie jumped up and down. They're married. They're married. During their first dance, Sophie tugged at Dominic's jacket. He lifted her up, and all 3 swayed together as one family. Late that night, they stood on the balcony. Snow began to fall softly. Sometimes I still can't believe this is real, Elena whispered. It's real. You, Sophie, this life all real. It all started with a little girl standing in the snow. Dominic smiled. The snow that changed everything. And as snow blanketed Chicago in white, Dominic Salvatore, once the most feared, most alone man in the underworld, held his wife close. He'd spent 37 years building an empire of power, but one brave little girl taught him what true power really was. Love, family, home. He finally had all 3. Dear friends, thank you for this journey with us. This story reminds us, no matter how dark our past, we deserve second chances. The smallest among us can change lives in unimaginable ways, and true power isn't wealth or fear, it's love and family. How did this story touch you? Share your thoughts in the comments. We treasure every message from your hearts. If you enjoyed this, please like, share, and subscribe for more heartwarming stories daily. We wish you good health, happiness, and peace always. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.